Hey everyone, my name is Ben Chang, and today I'd like to use my cyber chat to talk a little bit about the challenges for space systems when it comes to cybersecurity. I'd like to use a very recent and potentially destructive attack that damaged a satellite system, completely disconnected an entire country, and could have devastated that country's military systems. In the early hours of February 24th, 2022, two things happened. First, Russian troops and missiles crossed the eastern border of Ukraine. And second, thousands of routers and modems lost connection with their satellites across Europe. An internet outage like this could have a devastating impact on the millions of devices connected to servers all around the world. That impact could be even worse for the devices that support a country's defense system on the brink of an invasion. I'd like to go in depth and discuss how this attack happened and how we can prevent it moving forward. So, the attack itself. Thousands of routers and modems from Ukrainian homes to German wind turbines that had been originally connected to Viasat's KASAT satellite were among those affected. Viasat's KASAT covers basically all of Europe. It's this black region here. It was also discovered that those modems were making no attempt to reconnect to the network once they were off of it, which was odd. Viasat claims that the network was largely stabilized within hours of the attack, although some users were reportedly offline for as long as 2 weeks. This attack had three stages. First, infiltrate the network. Second, deploy the malware to all the modems on the network. And third was to block those reconnection attempts. I'm going to talk about the malware first, and then we'll talk about the network infiltration afterwards. The malware itself was allegedly a form of wiper malware called Acid Rain, discovered by researchers at Sentinel Labs. According to these researchers, Acid Rain turns out to be a pretty simple brute force way to hack a network. And the code has things like large nested if statements that just delete a bunch of files from non-standard directories. The actual attack itself, once the malware is on the modems on the ground, is that it overwrites a bunch of data in flash memory and in the hardware. So it goes into files like this and completely derails them, just throws a bunch of nonsense data in them. After crippling an estimated 40,000 modems, it was later discovered that the same hacker had started flooding the network with requests in order to block the modem's attempts to reconnect to the internet. Now, while this malware was destructive, I think the most strategic part and the most devastating part was the network infiltration, the very first step, which starts with the hacker on the ground. According to Viasat's official report of the incident, a VPN misconfiguration allowed a ground-based hacker to gain access with sensitive management terminal. They were then able to navigate to other management terminals on the same network system until it found one from which it could deploy the malware to all the modems that were connected to the satellite. That is when it deployed it, and thousands were affected. Now, Viasat hasn't released detailed information about the attack, but it is possible that this attacker needed to use things like shared permissions, vulnerable credentials, or maybe a password cracking algorithm like the ones we're discussing in class to navigate between terminals on the management system. So that is big. A lot of modems are relying on this satellite security, and an attack like this with just one VPN misconfiguration could completely derail it. So what are the challenges here that we're noticing? Particularly with this incident, there was a misconfigured VPN. There's the possible unencryption of network messages that made it easier for the hacker to read them once they were on the network. And there was also possibly a number of user credentials available. Again, within that system, users are probably very trusted. Most of the cybersecurity protections in place are on the ground systems, which is exactly one of the problems with space security as a whole, is that these systems rely very much on the ground-based technology for their security. And so once you gain access to things on space, it's very easy for you to have an impact on thousands of people, and it's very difficult for those in charge of the satellite to regain control. That's the difficulty of remote remediation. When it comes to space systems, the security of signals in the network are also very easy to intercept since they go everywhere. And you also have the very weird caveat of radiation exposure, like solar flares and other UV rays that could potentially, although the chance is low, have a significant impact on things like internet outages. As our world becomes more reliant on remote systems, including satellites, we also become more vulnerable to attacks that could derail those vital defense and communication systems. This attack on the KASAT satellite not only warns us about the vulnerability of an increasingly accessible space industry, it also serves as a reminder of the vulnerability of all software systems, even those on the largest of scales. Ukraine's military communications, for example, could have been completely compromised if they had been fully reliant on their satellite internet coverage. Now, fortunately, they relied on landlines for their military communication, but it's not completely impossible to imagine a country relying completely on the internet for such communication in the future. In that event, like for example, it's a country that is maybe younger, doesn't even have landlines going throughout the country. Maybe the internet evolved alongside it, and so it's easier for them to use. It's very easy to imagine that a hacker making an attack like this could have actually destroyed a country. So what do we do to fortify this? Now, Viasat, again, hasn't released a lot of intimate details about their network and what they've done. They say they've fortified it. But the NSA has some good guidelines for VSAT cybersecurity best practices, including encrypting network messages, limiting access to user credentials, implementing firewalls for access attempts. Those last two, again, very similar to the things we're already discussing in class about how potentially you could have even something as simple as a brute force password attack that completely bypasses everything. If you have different types of firewalls, better practices for passwords and account logins once you're on the network, then an attacker like this could be stumped once they get onto the network and they don't have any access to the modems on the ground. The NSA also says you can maintain proper equipment once you deploy it, so that again, you just have more walls in place to prevent against an attack, even after a hacker gets access to the space system off of the ground. There's obviously a lot more areas that we could cover with space systems. It's a very broad subject, but I hope this gave you some insight as to the current challenges and recent attacks and threats posed to space systems in the realm of cybersecurity. Thank you for listening.